Hello teachers. The following video was put together by Jennifer Gunn from the Region 10 ELAR team. This video is about the extended constructed response question, the essay, that students will encounter on the State STAR and EOC exams. Use the information she provides along with the training materials that we've provided and the rubrics from the state to deepen your understanding of the extended constructed responses. If you watch this video and the short constructed response video and then answer the open-ended questions that follow each of the videos, you can receive credit for this as a 2-hour PD. Please reach out to your strategist or our team if you have any questions.
Thanks for tuning into this video from the Region 10 ELAR team. I am Jennifer Gunn, and I will be talking with you about the extended constructed response rubrics and score point analysis. If you'd like to follow along with me into the same slide deck I'll be using, feel free to access the slides using the bit.ly that you see on the screen. It'll be bit.ly/capital ECR lowercase scoring all capital Zoom. So what we're going to be discussing today is the rubrics themselves, a score point analysis looking at student samples, and a strength goal analysis that we can use to provide feedback for student writing growth. So let's begin with the rubric analysis. Hopefully you were able to access that slide deck. And on slide 6, please go ahead and choose the grade level rubric that you would like to look at. We do have a Spanish rubric for grades 3-5. The grades 3-5 and the 6 through EOC, English 1 and 2, are going to contain both informational and argumentative rubrics. Clicking on these top links are going to give you access to the Region 10 one-pagers, but you can also see that we have connected you directly to the full rubrics from TEA. Now, let me, as you're pulling the rubric up, clarify that we have genre-specific rubrics for informational and argumentative writing. You will note that students in grade 6 through English 2 EOC may see a prompt asking them to respond by writing a letter, a correspondence prompt. But that correspondence writing task would still be scored by either the informational or argumentative rubric, depending on which the task most aligns with. Now, as you look at the rubric you've pulled up, I want you to note at the top of that one-pager that you see the 3-point category of development and organization of ideas. In that 3-point category, you see 4 bullet points. One bullet point has to do with how well the student has focused on a central idea, controlling idea, thesis, argument, opinion, and you'll notice all those words for a variety of grade levels and rubric purposes. The next bullet is on how organized the writing is. After that, is the evidence specific and relevant? How well did they support their controlling idea? And finally, how was their expression of ideas? Ultimately, we want that expression to be clear and effective, where all the sentences and phrases are intentionally contributing to the overall quality and clarity of the message. Now, as you continue to look at the rubrics, I want to provide you a few score distinctions. So when we look at a 0, we need to note the descriptor that it lacks understanding of writing purpose. So it might not have understood the prompt or the writing task at hand. If you look at those descriptors for each of the 4 bullets under the development and organization of ideas, we may have a controlling idea. So a controlling idea alone is not enough to move them out of a 0. But organization is not going to be real evident. The evidence will either be missing or irrelevant. And obviously the expression of their ideas is going to be unclear or even incoherent. But as we move from a 0 to a 1, the main difference is that you will have a controlling idea that is evident, and you will have some evidence, even if it is insufficient or perhaps irrelevant. So with a clear controlling idea and some evidence, we can move a student from a 0 to a 1. But a 1 is still not developed. The organization is going to be minimal or weak. The expression of ideas will still be ineffective. Moving from a 1 to a 2, we're going to see some partial development around that controlling idea. We will have more organization, although it will still be limited, as will be the evidence. It might still have some irrelevant evidence, but we're going to see a more substantial amount of relevant evidence. But the expression of ideas is basic, still pretty simplified, somewhat workmanlike. A 3 is going to have a clearly developed controlling idea with effective organization, specific, relevant, well-chosen evidence, with a clear and effective expression of ideas. Now, you'll notice underneath that 3-point category of the development and organization of ideas that we do have a separate 2-point category in this rubric for conventions. The reason that we began and will focus on ideas is that if a response receives a score point of 0 in the development and organization of ideas trait, that response will also earn a 0 for the conventions trait. So to even access the 2 points for conventions, a student's development and organization of ideas has to be solid enough to earn them a 1 or above. When you're scoring conventions, it needs to be a secondary consideration, and we're looking at a 0 with little to no command of grade level appropriate conventions, a 1 as an inconsistent command, and a 2 a consistent command of conventions. So if thinking about this instructionally, our feedback and our priority needs to be content. That content is more critical than conventions is a very important understanding for our instructional decisions. You can grow a student's use of conventions without sacrificing a focus on the ideas. Explicit instruction around conventions can be brief through a mini lesson connected to a mentor text, and that mentor text could be as short as 1 sentence. Sometimes all we need is 1 sentence to convey and model and provide a mentor of the convention we're trying to illustrate. And we immediately want to connect our instruction to the students having an opportunity to do this and apply this in their own writing. Now, as we move into the score point analysis, we want you to be aware that the content we have included was pulled from TEA and their scoring guides. So we have provided for you here a direct link to the scoring guides released at each grade band, and you may want to explore these for more details and more clarity, because we are going to just spotlight some score samples from 5th grade. Before we do that, we do want you to see the breakdown of a prompt, and we have chosen the English 2 correspondence prompt to do that with. you will see at the bottom of this slide that we're looking at 3 parts of a prompt. We're looking at what the student will need to read. We're looking at the prompt itself, the content the student must write, and a clarification in the final and third part about how that student needs to write. So when we're looking at a prompt, we will see in this specific example, read the article, volunteering is its own reward. So the student has been instructed to read that, and notice the expectation. Based on the information in the article, write a response to the following. It is very important that we understand and convey to students that their response should be completely based in and on the reading they were given. The next part of the prompts will be the actual prompt of what the student must write. So here it says, write a letter to your principal in which you argue who would benefit most from a volunteering program at school, student participants or members of the community they could serve. So we see that ultimately this prompt is asking for an argument and would be scored on the argumentative rubric. Finally, we're getting some clarification about how the student must write to that prompt. So it says to write a well-organized letter that responds to the prompt. There will always be a command about evidence. Use specific evidence from the article to support your answer. That evidence may be paraphrased, it may be directly quoted, it just must be present. Now, we are not going to stop our video for you to read, but hopefully you might pause the video here so that you can read this article, Steam and Sail, because it is very important that you are familiar with the passage as the human raters who will be scoring these would be, because you will not be able to accurately and fully judge a piece of student writing unless you have also read that passage. So again, we encourage you, pause the video, read Steam and Sail, and then press play again so that you're looking at the next portion with the understanding of the passage the students had. We also are offering a few reading engagement strategies, annotating, asking questions, inviting the students to look for patterns. Now, hopefully you are approaching this with an understanding of that passage, and let's break down this prompt. So this is the prompt students had on the passage Steam and Sail. Steamboats and clippers were popular forms of transportation in the United States in the 1800s. Explain whether you think the steamboat or the clipper ship changed life in the United States more. So we need to first ask what is being asked of students. And we see that word explain, but they are being asked to explain whether they think the steamboat or the clipper ship changed the life in the US more. Because they would have to take a position on which one changed life more, the mode of writing here is actually argumentative. So we need to be careful that the word explain was present, but this is not informational writing. We are being asked for a position, an argument. And then we need to consider what reading concepts are required to successfully complete that task, because we do know that students must pull evidence from the passage and the response has to be based on the reading. Here, I want to remind you again that if a response receives a score point of 0 for the development and organization of ideas, they will also earn a 0 on conventions. So given that implication, we are going to look at the score points only for the development and organization of ideas first, and that's what we will be starting on this sample. So this student sample did score a 0. It reads, in August 17, 1807, a person named Robert Fulton revealed the Clermont was a steamship. The ship had narrow front to go faster in the water. Another boat called the Clipper's boat. The Clipper was built in New York in 1845. Both of those boats would bring changes to the United States of America. This response does not have an evident, clear claim because it does not explain which ship created the greater change in the US as the prompt asked. It does not really provide evidence for a claim. It just provides some summary of their reading. Now, let's look at a couple of different ones. And as you heard me read on the 0, I will continue to read these with some correction because we cannot let the conventions get in the way of an accurate scoring for the development and organization of ideas. So sample C says, in the paragraph, steam and sail, I think the steamboats do a lot more than the clippers because clippers only helped with London to get tea faster, while steamboats helped a lot more than clippers. They helped with people wanting to travel, make new towns and land, help the USA expand, and they were faster and reliable. They were really good use also when the clippers came along. They beat the competition in clippers. So this earned a 1 because it does have a claim. Steamboats helped a lot more than clippers. And although the organization is minimal, it does have some paraphrased evidence, and that support does connect to their claim. It doesn't really go into any explanation, and the expression of ideas overall is ineffective. Now, the next one that we're going to look at is only one sentence, which can be difficult for us to see as a score point worthy of a 1. But I want you to, as I read it, to see that it does have a clear claim and it does provide some evidence. The sample from the student reads, I think that the clippers changed life the most because it moved faster than any other boat at that time, and it was the right time to make it because of the gold rush. So again, clear claim, clippers changed life the most. It does have some paraphrased evidence. The organization is not much. It's not really evident. Again, the expression of ideas is ineffective, but having that claim and having some relevant paraphrased evidence does move this one sentence response into a 1 and not a 0. Now let's go ahead and move up the rubric to a 2. Again, I invite you as I read this to consider those characteristics of a 2. What claim is being made? How is this maybe a little more developed with its organization, even though it's not paragraphed, than the ones we just saw? What kind of evidence is being provided? And do we have that basic expression of ideas as opposed to sort of an insufficient or ineffective one? So the student sample for a 2 reads, I claim that in the 1800s, the clippers were more useful because the clippers were made to battle the tide and the current, while the steamboat, yes, could fight the currents and tides. They could not, however, sail faster than a clipper in tea races and gold rush. It states that people used the clippers because the steamship could blow up at any time. Steamboats also, if the engine runs out, you're stranded unless you swim back to shore which is not very safe because of sharks and other sea critters. Also, during the gold rush, most people used clippers because clippers could cut through the tide, while steamships had a high chance of blowing. And that is why I think clippers were more useful than steamboats and ships. So we need to notice, even though it's not paragraphed, that the student does have a claim, a controlling idea, and introduction. I claim that in the 1800s, the clippers, and they go on. It does have a conclusion, not paragraphed, but there is a closing thought. That is why I think clippers were more useful than steamboats. The organization is minimal and limited, but there is an organization from an intro into that body evidence and into that closing idea. We do have relevant paraphrased evidence, and it is insufficiently and inaccurately explained, but an attempt was made. Overall, this is a basic expression of ideas with general word choice and basically a partially undeveloped, but a partially developed attempt at that writing task. All right, again, I invite you to ask yourself and identify as I read the controlling idea, the organizational structure, the specific and relevant evidence that the student used in this response of a 3 for the development and organization of ideas. The student writes, I think that clippers changed life in the United States. They didn't need any fuel. They had more cargo space. They were faster than steamboats. They both traveled in the water, but I think that clippers changed life more than steamboats. That's what got people to come to the United States. Clipper changed life in the United States because they didn't need fuel, which means you don't need to stop and put fuel in the middle of nowhere. No fuel made a trip faster than using a steamboat because steamboats actually do need fuel. So that makes the trip a bit longer, and they wouldn't make faster than a clipper to drop off the tea first. Steamboats were little, but clippers were bigger, which meant more cargo space, more trading, and more money to expand the United States. They could carry all kinds of things to trade and earn money. I think that clipper actually made life in the United States better. Clippers were fast and had many sails. The faster the better, because if you were racing someone to drop off tea, you would win if the person had a steamboat, because they would have to stop and put fuel many times, and you wouldn't, because clippers don't need fuel. They're wind powered and have 30 or more sails. I personally think that clippers are better than steamboats and changed life in the United States. They are better in many different ways. They don't need fuel. They have more cargo space. They go faster than steamboats. My opinion is that they really, really changed life in the United States. So this student on this 5th grade extended constructed response scored a 3 for the development and organization of ideas. They offer a claim. I think clippers changed life in the United States. Okay, they list reasons in that introduction, and their organization is paragraph by paragraph connected to the ideas listed in that claim. They do provide relevant paraphrased evidence, and they do provide some explanation along the way, some connections of that. And the expression of ideas overall is clear and effective because all that the student wrote contributes to the clarity of their message. All right, now we have looked at a student sample or more for each score point in the development and organization of ideas. We need to now look that all of the samples we've looked at, B through E, scored a 0 on conventions, which would be little to no command of appropriate grade level conventions. The last essay we just read, F, that scored a 3 for ideas, scored a 1 on conventions. an inconsistent command for grade level appropriate conventions. Again, I want to repeat that we do want instructionally to build students' mastery of conventions, but the idea category is going to be priority number one. And on that note, we're going to talk about some strength and goal analysis and feedback that we want to provide students, centering again that number one priority for ideas. So there is a link in the slide deck so that you can access the strength and goal chart in full. We have aligned the center column of the chart to the language of our rubrics. And the value of using this chart is that we are taking the focus away from scores and numbers and placing it instead on strengths and goals so that we're providing feedback to prioritize the growth and the learning over that score judgment. We want to invite the student into reflection and goal setting about what they can actually change in their writing. Because we all know that the minute you assign a score or a grade, often the student is done. They've received a final judgment, and the motivation to return and revise and edit and make improvements or changes is not there. So for this section, we are going to move to some upper level responses. We saw fifth grade score samples for our score analysis. We want to feature some English 1 responses here. So again, you might want to pause the video and read the passage Tending Roses in full so that you're returning with some full awareness. I'm going to provide a little bit of context here so that if you're listening straight through, you'll be able to know the reading demands. So this English 1 passage does require a little more inferencing than that fifth grade passage, Steam and Sail. The first 4 paragraphs and the last paragraph of Tending Roses are focused on the narration of Katie's experience. But we would need to infer that the italicized paragraphs 5 through 10 are when Katie is reading the journal of her grandmother, and therefore those paragraphs are really in the voice of Katie's grandmother. Now you'll note at the top of that full passage when you open it that it does provide students prior to the passage some helpful, beneficial context. We want to encourage students not to skip over those sorts of instructional looking statements before passages. And it tells the student while visiting her grandmother's farm with her husband and her young son, Joshua, Katie finds her grandmother's journal next to a jar of fireflies. So we can see in the passage that we open with Katie. Let's spotlight paragraph 2. In the glow from the yard light outside, I, Katie, sat down to read the spidery writing. So it's signaling us that she is going into the reading of the journal. And then it begins the italicized paragraphs. Jumping into those paragraphs, let's just spotlight paragraph 8. From the grandmother's journal, the grandmother says, I smiled as I gazed at the moon. There, in soft shades of blue and rose, was the celestial face I once knew from my storybooks. I thought of how many times as a girl I stared into that faraway moon and dreamed impossible dreams, wishing for the same treasures I heard my children ask for when I passed their doors at night. I thought of that part of me that once created bigger worlds, and I mourned. Jumping all the way to the end of the passage, back with Katie, it says, I laid the book on the table and carried the jar outside. In the darkness of the yard, I lifted the lid and promised myself I would remember to look for the fireflies tomorrow night. Now, that final closing idea of Katie promising herself to look for fireflies is the basis of this extended constructed response prompt, where students are asked to explain how reading the journal leads Katie to remind herself to look for fireflies. So we're going to read this first student sample. I invite you to test what you've already learned about scoring and jot down for yourself if you think this passage would have scored a 0, 1, 2, or 3 for ideas, and would it have scored a 0, 1, or 2 on conventions. The student sample reads, while reading her mother's, she becomes aware of things such as spending more, enjoying yourself, and not constantly put your back on the world, which would cause Grandma and soon Katie to mourn what was once there. To begin with, Katie was reading the grandmother's diary, which soon had an effect on her own personal thoughts. For example, they grew so tall while my back was to them. This emphasizes not paying attention to important things can lead to regret, which was shown in the grandmother's diary. We learn that Katie is influenced to go look and chase for fireflies. In addition, Katie soon reflects and agrees to spend more time with nature or her surroundings than having her back on the nature family, as once her grandmother mourned to do. For instance, part of me that once created bigger worlds and I mourned. This emphasizes how she too thought bigger possibilities as a child or dreamed big. In conclusion, both the impact of the journal and Katie's grandma help us conclude or know why it all leads Katie reminding herself to look for butterflies. All right, so I'm going to walk you through how the strength goal chart might be utilized, and then we're going to check those scores that you have assigned sample 1. When working with the strength goal chart, you want to try to focus on priority number 1, development and organization of ideas. It's clear that that student in sample 1 made a lot of convention missteps, but that's not where the feedback needs to be right now. So I would tell this student a strength. As a reader, it was clear to me that you wanted to show how Katie learns from the journal, not to put her back on the world and enjoying herself, as each paragraph built on this idea from your first sentence. Note how I am quoting the student's specific writing in the feedback that I am providing to them. And I am listing a strength that is going to help continue to make that student a successful writer, because that tendency toward connecting and threading everything together is what we want in organization. Staying in the ideas category, though, for their goal, I'm going to target the expression of ideas. Now, this is where you might see some overlap with conventions, but I want to keep it about the ideas. And I want to say to that student, as a reader, your ideas would be more clear with more specific words. For example, you write, while reading her mother's, she becomes aware. It would be more clear if it read, while reading her grandmother's diary, Katie becomes aware. You want to point specifically to a place that can have more specific words, clarifying that it was grandmother's instead of mother's, pointing out that there was a journal or a diary, making sure that she says Katie. And then I want to ask the student, where do you see other opportunities to add or change words to make your ideas more specific? and lead that student to some independent reflection to continue self-correcting and revising and improving. Now, that feedback should align with the score that the student would earn. And this student scored a 2 on the organization and development of ideas because they did have a thesis. They do have organization. It's still somewhat limited to the key ideas they present, but they do have it. And it even includes some paragraph to paragraph transitions. They have relevant evidence, but the expression of ideas is still basic, which goes back to the feedback I gave on their goal. Instead of using very generalized words, how can we make them more specific? This student, because of an inconsistent command of grade level conventions, scored a 1 on conventions. So that score overall is a 3 out of the 5 possible points. I do want to briefly spotlight another student sample. Instead of reading this student sample in full, I will let you go back and visit it on your own. But I do want to look at the last paragraph of sample 2. This student has built in their first and middle second paragraphs to this culminating idea. Their conclusion, their final paragraph reads, "This is what I believe. Katie took away that event, though she hasn't found it yet. She too can one day find happiness in the little things, just like her grandma. This was shown when Katie said, 'I promised myself I would remember to look for the fireflies tomorrow night.' The fireflies would be a metaphor for the little things in life, while tomorrow night is a metaphor for the rest of her life." This student scored a 3 on development and organization of ideas because their thesis, that last sentence in the last paragraph, is particularly insightful, and the expression of ideas leading up to that are clear and effective, contributing to that culminating thesis in the last paragraph. This, just like our previous sample, was a 1 on conventions. And so returning to these might be a good exercise to see the difference between a 2 and a 3 with the same missteps or equitable missteps in the convention category. I really want you to realize with this student sample and that thesis being in the very last sentence of the last paragraph, that specific feedback to students is far more important than a writing formula. Because if we were instructing and providing our guidance around a formula, this student might not have received credit from you instructing around a formula that they clearly can get, because it is still good writing that all builds to that really fine final sentence. And the conventions, again, cannot get in our way, because I need to see that it means metaphor, even though the word that they typed is not spelled correctly as metaphor. It should not impede the ideas that we are trying to credit the student. They're going to receive a deduction, if you will, on the conventions for those kinds of missteps. All right. I know this has been a lot of information, and we really appreciate your tuning into the video to get it. There is linked here a full 6-hour training slide deck with some additional resources. So you might want to access that and explore some card sorts and additional sample prompts and other materials that we didn't have time to cover in this video. And we also invite you to reach out, email, or contact any of us on the Region 10 ELAR team if we can provide clarifications or support in any way. Thank you so much. We wish you all the best.